We had had a two-car head-on fatal accident. A Honda car had hit a semi head-on, and it had a young woman that was killed in the Honda car. And the semi had blocked the road in such a way that the tow trucks couldn't get it out, and they needed a piece of highway equipment. So John showed up at the scene. I deliberately saw to it that none of the normal guys that helped me remove the woman's body from the car. I asked Aykroyd to help me remove her from the car, and I did that because I wanted to see what his response was to handling this woman's body. And I was not prepared for what happened, because as we took her out of the car, he told me that he was surprised at how light she was and that she weighed the exact same amount as RACHANDA, his stepdaughter that was missing.
She went missing on July 10th, 1990.
Around 10 o'clock is when she was missing. If I would have had someone take me home then, I might have came up on something.
It makes me so angry because I feel like she could have been saved.
So who's the most likely suspect? John Arthur Aykroyd.
I don't think. I know who killed my sister. John Aykroyd is the one who killed my sister.
She's up on that mountain somewhere. She's gotta be.
I know this road like the back of my hand. Same with the stations, only FM band. Farms and truck stops, fireworks stands. Yeah, I know this road like the back of my hand.
By 1990, the case of Kay Turner's murder had long been cold. Police strongly suspected that state highway mechanic John Aykroyd had killed her, but lacked evidence to charge him. In the decade plus that had passed, some of the original investigators had retired, witnesses had moved away, and the Turner case had faded into the background as an unsolved murder. But soon, another disappearance would reignite those lingering suspicions and draw a new generation of investigators into Aykroyd's orbit.
Undesirable character, and see a chance that there's a nice looking girl that is getting developed. Take a chance and see nobody else is around, and just walk right up to the car with her. Because 87 pounds is nothing for somebody to carry. And they, a little girl like that, what fight is she going to put up? With somebody my size, your size, even smaller. You can punch them, and they're just going to crumple. You hit them over the head, they have no fight.
In July of 1990, RACHANDA Pickle was 13 years old. She loved animals, helping her mother with chores, and bossing around her 14-year-old brother Byron. She lived with her family at Santiam Junction, a state highway maintenance yard at the junction of Highway 20 and Highway 22, about 26 miles west of Sisters.
Just a typical 13-year-old, very much into the latest fashion of the time, very into the most top 40 music.
She was wonderful. Couldn't ask for anything sweeter.
She was funny, and she was tiny. RACHANDA was silly and goofy.
We used to call her Punky Brewster, because she looked exactly like Punky Brewster.
With Mom having to be the sole provider of the family, she had boyfriends and husbands, but they were always very short-lived. Me and my sister had to rely on each other.
Santiam Junction is a small and remote compound made up of the workers who live there and their families. The nearest towns are Sisters to the east, and Sweet Home, where Byron and RACHANDA attended school, to the west. It's an isolated spot, but after struggling for years to make ends meet as a single mom and enduring a string of bad relationships, Linda was willing to accept that isolation in exchange for the stability and security living with Aykroyd seemed to provide.
We grew up very poor. From the outside looking in, it looked like John had a lot of money. He's able to go out and go have pizza, which was stuff we weren't really, when you're poor, you can't really do a lot of that and stuff. So yeah, I remember meeting John.
Because all I had in my life was men cheating on me, stealing from me, and I didn't have anything to steal. And John wasn't that type. And I thought I would be more safe and secure.
It seemed like that he was very stable. I mean, he had a job working for the state highway department. He was a military guy, and he was very good at making relationships very quick.
85 is when me and John got married. And I felt good that I could dress my kids not in rags. And I wanted my kids to graduate, where I could have more things than what I did when I was young. And it just backfired,
While living with John might have provided stability for Linda, it was a nightmare for her kids. Ackroyd was often described by those who knew him as unflappable and calm. But behind closed doors, he was violent and volatile.
She used to have her bangs a certain way, same way all the time. She didn't come in with her hair done one morning, and I'm like, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you do your hair? And he had ripped a patch of her hair out.
She showed up one day to school. She had a black eye. And she had a really big black eye, and it had a little cut underneath it right here. I asked her, I'm like, Rachanda, what happened? And she said, my stepdad did this.
Byron always had black eyes or fat lips.
But they were very visibly, obviously abused children.
So what was his relationship like with your kids?
Very good. I mean, we went fishing.
Have you ever spanked her?
Yes.
Okay, with what?
I made a paddle. And at Linda's request, I started disciplining the kids. She had to get on to me a couple times when, about her always having to discipline the kids and me not. So she said, you spank harder.
Okay.
I mean, I remember him spanking her over one of those old school wind-up alarm clocks, and it got broke. That beating she got was over the top. It was scary. My mom was yelling at John to stop.
There would be times and this was way before she came out missing, there would be times that his eyes would change color and he says, I want to kill someone. And I would holler at him and say, John, you're scaring me.
It was a very fearful environment. And when John snapped, it was scary.
Are you a person that loses your temper at home?
No.
Okay. So you're pretty calm and cool most of the time?
I'd say 98% of the time.
She never wanted school to end. She'd always say, oh man, there's only 2 more hours of school. Oh man, there's only an hour left of school.
It wasn't a healthy environment. We definitely knew at that age that not every child went through what we did. Our plan was, from a very young age, our goal was just to get to 18 or to old enough just to get out.
In her mind, she was going to get away from him one day, and she would have.
By the end of the school year in 1990, Rachanda and Byron had convinced Linda to let them spend part of the summer with their biological father. The kids traveled to Medford to meet up with Stephen Pickle, a man they barely knew.
I think it's part of every child, no matter how good or bad your parents are, that you want to know where you come from. You want to know what type of person they are, and we wanted to have the chance to get to know who our dad was and form our own opinion.
It didn't take long after their arrival for things to get tense. Stephen Pickle confronted the kids about family rumors that Rachanda had been sexually abused by both an extended family member and a man who Linda had been with before Ackroyd.
My dad had us both sit down on the couch. I remember sitting there, me and her looking at each other, and it was just like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have this conversation. And my dad was livid. He was gonna talk about getting an attorney and stuff and getting us both yanked from my mom. It was underneath her watch and she didn't do anything about it.
Later, Stephen Pickle reacted badly to Rachanda and Byron's attempt to join a game of hide-and-seek with neighborhood kids, convinced it was an excuse for the young boys and girls to have sex. Devastated, Rachanda demanded to go home to her mother.
My uncle and my aunt were getting ready to come towards Sweet Home for a family reunion, so we went out to my Uncle Bob's place. Dropped my sister off, and I knew I'd see her within a couple weeks. And I mean, it's still ingrained in my head, seeing her in the back of my uncle's Chevy Blazer.
Rachanda's ride dropped her off in Sweet Home. She immediately began looking for a way that she wouldn't have to return to Santiam Junction alone.
She came to me and asked me if I would go to the junction with her and spend the night. And I said I can't. Rachanda was adamant about not going up there by herself, and I asked her why. She wouldn't tell me. Because I don't. Will you just please go with me? And I said I can't. I would love to, but I can't.
When little girls run away from families, sometimes there's a reason for this. And I ask you if you ever sexually abused your daughter, right? And your answer was no. And I'm not accusing you of sexually abusing. We're just conducting an investigation. We want to make sure that every angle is covered.
I can see part of you asking my sexual activity, like if I'm having sex, and maybe not getting enough from Linda, and Chinese getting developed, maybe I try a little bit of fresh stuff here, that's sick. I know there's people out there who do that all the time, and I know some of them.
Rachanda's classmates, Mandy and Michelle, had been molested in their own home for years. Well before that summer, the sisters had begun to notice familiar signs in Rachanda in addition to her symptoms of physical abuse. She had become depressed, was tired all the time, and had stopped caring as much about her appearance. Their suspicions seemed confirmed when Rachanda told Michelle she'd sought help from their school's counselor.
We were in the library. It was a book fair. I just looked up and she was crying, and she said, "I'll be back." And she got up and left. Came back to the library, I don't know, about 20 minutes later, and she said, "You know what you told me that happened to you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's happened to me too."
During that time, she got really depressed. She didn't want to go home.
She kept asking, "Can I spend the night? Can I spend the night? Can I spend the night?" And back then, my parents, we weren't allowed to hardly spend a night with anybody. We pretty much had to beg. So they let her spend the night.
That was a Friday night. A Saturday she stayed, and then that Sunday her mom comes to get her, and Rachanda hid in my closet.
Screaming and throwing fits, didn't want to leave.
Throwing clothes over her, throwing shoes, throwing stuff at her mom.
You don't act like that if you just, gonna be sent to your room. You do not act like that. And she was literally terrified.
"Don't make me go, I don't want to go, please don't make me go." And I think her mom's like, okay, you can stay with Jennifer, but I don't think she got to.
A couple weeks after that, that's when we snuck her. We had our older friends write a note.
And forged my mom's name. We took that note, took it to the school. Rachanda walked home with us.
We told her we'd hide her for as long as we could.
So we snuck her through a window, and she stayed the night with us.
What can we do? We were little kids too. We tried. It's pretty bad when kids have to go to that level to do that.
I've never felt like any adult who was put into the place of authority to help her ever helped her.
I think that she did try to protect herself, and nobody listened.
Rachanda continued trying to spend nights away from home whenever possible, with any friends or relatives who could take her in. While she mostly kept the details of what she was going through to herself, it was clear that it was getting worse.
She started cutting herself. Even in class, she would just take a tack and just cut herself.
And I'd ask her, is she all right? And she's just like, "I don't want to be home. What's going on?" And she wouldn't, say what the exact reason was. Now getting older, I have my suspicions what those reasons were. When you're constantly in a state of fear all the time, Actually analyzing what's going on is you can't. So you're just in a state of fear, you're on eggshells. You know, you just want to have a normal day. Just a normal day. That's all you want.
I remember her telling me and Mandy a couple things. One time I was doing dishes and he called me over on the couch and just started tickling me.
And it got more aggressive to where he was trying to put his body on top of her. And RACHANDA had kicked enough somehow and got away. After that incident is when the other stuff started happening when he was coming into her room.
She never said if anything had happened, but I'm pretty sure it did.
We never felt like she had to because we were kind of going through the same thing at home. But it's not okay for him to go into her room at night. It was never okay. And I always felt like he was raping her.
Had she been abused by anyone, by any of the men in her life that you know of?
Not if I'm aware of. I don't ever recall her
She
being
provided any
No.
concerns about that? No.
My read of it now is that there was something going on at home between John and RACHANDA, because when RACHANDA did confide to Mom what Dad said, you know, how he was gonna get charges filed and stuff, I know my mom told John, and it was the very next day that she was gone.
When RACHANDA arrived back at Santiam Junction, it hadn't been long since she had confirmed to her biological father that she'd been sexually abused. After that conversation, her father had called Linda with threats to involve the authorities, and Linda had told John. RACHANDA tried and failed to ensure that she wouldn't be home alone without Byron. Then, RACHANDA disappeared.
You know, she was home when Mom and Dad left on the 10th.
She held back because she asked me, Mom, do you have to go to work? So there was something going on, but I just didn't see it then.
John did not work all day. He ended up coming home early. According to him, he asked her if she wanted to go for a ride with him. She said no.
RACHANDA did everything she could to get away from this man. She was not going to go and spend any alone time with him. There's just no way.
His story was that he just went out on a drive to take pictures of deer.
He's never took pictures of deer. That was so far-fetched.
He had driven all the way around there, and he has his camera with him, and he comes out on the road and makes sure that the other highway department workers see him, see he has a camera, and he makes a point of, I'm going to establish myself an alibi. I was here at this particular time.
According to him, when he returned, she wasn't home, and that was about noon or 1-ish in the afternoon.
And when he picked me up, he was talking about RACHANDA wasn't there. After we got home, got dinner and all this stuff, I think it was around 10 to 5. I said, something's not right, John. I said, she should have been home. Where is she? And then he'd come back and tell me, well, I don't know. I said, well, obvious you should know. You were here with her.
Both Linda and I was under the assumption that somebody just happened to come in, maybe need help, and decided there is a perfect opportunity. Take it.
Wouldn't she put up a struggle?
Depends on how he got her out.
How could a person get her out?
Say he had a knife, and he threatened her if she made any noise. Jenny is the type that could be intimidated to be quiet.
So you could use a knife,
a gun.
I mean, there for the longest time when it was Freshly, I just said, why didn't you go home? Why didn't you go home? You could have probably walked in. He wouldn't expect you there. Or whoever it may be. And then I've always said, well, if I would have been there, it would have happened on a different day.
I remember that day. I remember Mom calling saying, have I heard from RACHANDA? I'm like, no. Why? Well, she's not home. And then, automatically, well, need to go down and check with, the Briggs boys and stuff, see if she's down there. We already did that. I'm like, you guys need to call the cops. Well, John says that we can't call the cops until she's gone for 24 hours and stuff. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you then. She's up there. She's up there.
Okay, and how old is she?
13.
When was the last time you saw her?
It was 8:30 yesterday morning.
And you're just now calling in?
Yeah.
Where did you think she was at?
Well, I figured she was over to the next door neighbor.
Did you check last night?
Yeah.
Okay, but you weren't concerned then see, I'm trying to find out why the delay of calling in.
Well, I understand that when a child's missing, you've got to wait 24 hours before the police will even petition you.
Oh, no, that's not true. Not with children. Children are not at all with children.
Oh.
There's no time limit on a child.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe there was.
No.
And then when Mom called the next day saying Rachanda hadn't made it home, I told my dad, we need to go up there. He's like, no, we're going to play it out. I told him, I'm like, you either taking me home and stuff, or I'm going to the truck stop and I'm going to find a trucker and I'm going to hitch a ride back home. And of course, that upset my dad. He started yelling at me, and that's when I broke down crying. I told him, something's wrong. Something's not right. And the next day, we loaded up into this vehicle and we drove up there.
100 searchers from 6 different county law enforcement agencies, including Lane County, spent their day poking through the wilderness near the Hoodoo ski area in search of 13-year-old Rachanda Leah Pickle. In the initial days, air searches of the mostly barren lava lands resulted in nothing. Now, ground crews are concentrating on the heavy underbrush that lines the roadways.
Well, we had all the workers go out and look. I'm telling John, well, you know this area, so tell them,
Did John seem worried about Rachanda?
Well, sort of yes, sort of no, I guess. The thing that was strange about it, we had sex. And when I think back, why would you have sex? I mean, there's a kid missing here.
His wife was kind of in denial. The most chilling thing of that interview with her was when she said that John had no interest in sex at all, except for the day that the Rachanda disappeared, and then he was all over her. It was a very telling sign that something got him very excited.
You told us in an earlier interview that after you'd gotten home, you had some sexual intercourse with your wife.
Right.
When did this happen?
The time?
Well, how long after you got home? Yeah. Still daylight?
Oh, yeah.
Who initiated the sexual contact in this particular one?
I think I did.
Okay.
You described to us the other day the sex that day. How was it?
It was great.
Fantastic.
Yeah. That was great. We had a great time.
Ackroyd's apparent sexual association with his stepdaughter's disappearance didn't end there. Less than 2 weeks later, searchers found a pair of pants initially thought to be Rachanda's. An investigator noticed the highway worker appeared to get an erection when shown the clothing, and that a wet spot developed on the front of his pants. For weeks, officials and volunteers continued searching the dense forests and lava fields that surround Santiam Junction.
That was probably one of the most, for this sheriff's office, one of the most labor-intensive searches that had occurred. You have a young girl that's missing in the Santiam forest or the Willamette forest, and that touches a lot of people's hearts and so forth. So, there was a lot of man-hours that went into looking for her.
Meanwhile, Jefferson County DA Bill Hanlon, who had inherited the cold Kay Turner case when he took office, convened a task force that would have a single purpose: putting John Ackroyd behind bars.
We had a really strong team. I mean, it was the case that needed to get solved.
Hanlon's feeling from the very beginning was, we have a responsibility to get this guy off the street. This has gone on way too long because he was a predator, and he clearly was.
As hope of finding Rachanda alive dimmed, the ongoing searches took on new meaning as members of the task force invited Ackroyd to join them, hoping he might inadvertently reveal information about her location.
John was just happy to be around with all these people, like one of the good old boys, to be involved in the investigation. I think he liked the idea of being involved.
That's fairly common with people like that. They like to be close to the action, and they like to find out what you know.
We were all walking through the woods, and even though we knew it was an exercise in futility, but the whole thing was to see if John was going to volunteer any information that may help us in the case. One of the things he talked about was possibly maybe a log or something might have been placed over top of her body. And to me, that was really weird. I mean, when you think of a loved one disappearing, these are not the kind of scenarios you come up with, unless you've been there, done that.
They did quite a bit more searching, different areas where he had said he'd driven. Of course, it was all dependent on, relying on what he had told him. He probably didn't tell him where he really went. They just never found her.
No trace of Rachanda was ever found. Unanswered questions about what really happened, who is to blame, and how things might have turned out differently trouble those affected to this day.
You know, that's probably what's haunted me my whole entire life, is looking back going, what did I fail to mention? Remember, conversation with me and my mom yelling at her and stuff. I'm like, the only thing that I could have done to save my sister's life is if I would have stepped out and been like, good, I'll be willing to go to a foster home just to get us out of the abusive environment. And of course, my mom was like, there was no abuse. Okay. That was the only, looking back now, if I would have done that, it probably would have saved her life.
Do you think he killed her? I don't know. I mean, I really don't want to think that way, but then there's the other part of me that wants to think that way. Looking back, I think, how in the world was he capable of doing it? Not really seeing signs. I think a lot of that.
This guy was a sick individual. He was a master manipulator, I think for anybody that's looking for answers, that wants to put blame on somebody, yeah, there's a little bit that I do put on my mom, but to say that it's all her fault, no. No, it's John Ackroyd's fault that this happened.
She could just bebop around and just be happy and, until he took it away from her. Until he took it all away from her. What an evil man.
We could have grew up together, she'd be a mother right now. Excuse me. I get to hear this. She doesn't. It just makes me so angry.
That young lady, 13 years old, I'm sure she would have done something really awesome. My granddaughter, who's 13, she has her whole future planned out. Can you imagine that? Makes me wonder about that young lady that lost her life. They should have listened to me.
Despite its best efforts, the task force's attempts to extract information from Ackroyd were going nowhere. His knack for creating reasonable doubt, even while implicating himself, was taking them in circles. They knew that ultimately it would be nearly impossible to prosecute him if they couldn't find Rachanda's body. They also knew that in the vast wilderness surrounding Santiam Junction, that might never happen.
He probably learned a lot from the K. Gene Turner case. He probably learned a lot about not disclosing where a body is.
We knew all along what we were dealing with. This wasn't a, maybe this is our guy. We knew that he was the guy. It was very clear from the beginning. But at the time, it wasn't popular to prosecute without a body. So they shifted the attention to the K. Turner case. And it looked like that was our best prospect to get him off the street before he killed somebody else. And that was our primary goal, was to keep from having more victims, which I feel we failed. Because those 2 young girls out of Newport, I believe, I'm quite convinced, died at his hands.
Every question in every breath, every exhale leaves a little death. In this way, and a memory that will wander with the ghost of how we trained. Yeah, I know this road like the back of my hand. Same with the stations on the FM band, phones and truck stops and firework stands. I know this road like the back of my hand.